Well, thanks, Nick, for inviting me along to do the talk today. As mentioned, I'm an independent information security advisor. And I think what may be of interest to you today is I advise people on what they should expect from their suppliers. So that could be you. You are the supplier to a person. Or you may need to then pass on that data to one of your subcontractors. So are you asking them the right questions? So this is where compliance comes in. You must comply with the tier ones, the larger companies, but the subcontractors must comply to you. Now there are things, standards, codes of best practice for us all to be addressing, and I'll highlight those. Okay, so just a little bit about me. I help people put systems together securely. There's lots of little files here and there always get left behind, and I just go in and check out that nothing insecure is being left behind. It's been done in an orderly fashion, systematic fashion. Policy development, that's been mentioned already about getting the policies and procedures into place. I also do security awareness training, and that is what makes the policies come alive. It's all very well the Information Commissioner comes in and says, yes, you've got a great information security policy, brilliant. Now, he just goes and asks one person operating a computer, when were you last trained in that policy, and they hadn't even seen that policy, then your company has now gone down in the estimations of whoever's auditing you. I do security auditing as well and report findings, and this keeps you going along. So if it's a plan, do, check, act. I help in all those areas, but the checking, I'll create findings, and then I'll check that you acted upon those findings. And then how have you planned to take it further? So, compliance, comply or die. What is compliance? In general, compliance means conforming to a rule such as a specification, policy, standard, or law. We found out about the law this morning. We've talked about policies, and I want to take it as I'm going to put several hats on today. I'm going to be a member of the public. What are you doing with my personal data? Are you handling it correctly? I'm going to be a contractor company. I'm going to be saying, how are you handling my business's data? So what do we comply with? Well, we've heard about legal, regulatory, and statutory compliance, and we've heard about the Data Protection Act. 8 principles, Principle 7 being the protect your data adequately. We've also heard what does adequately mean. Well, hopefully after my presentation you will find at least you've tried, you've showed you can demonstrate, and you can put to the Information Commissioner, we've done our best, and they will go away and say, yes, you have. I could make a company bulletproof tomorrow, but you might not get anyone into the building, the computer systems might be switched off, and you won't produce anything. It's all to do with what you can afford to do, and you are doing it to the best of your ability. And the people that you're complying with understand that. So contractual requirements, as we've said, third parties. You may be a third party to someone. You may get the third party requirements from somebody else. We comply with terms of operation. You may have heard of payment card industry compliance, PCI compliance. I get this all the time. I never signed anything to say that I should comply with anything. Well, you have without knowing it perhaps, because it's the terms of operation. You are operating with that understanding. So if you're using a payment card processing device, you've signed up to follow the PCI compliance. And that's where the banks, should there be fraud, the payment card brands will fine the banks because it costs so much to reprint these cards, investigate the fraud. Well, the first thing the bank will do will to put all the costs onto you. And or die. So heavy fines imposed by the Information Commissioner Office, we heard that. Kicking people when they're down even when they've shot their reputation, their mental health has been shot, then the Information Commissioner wades in and fines them £200,000. The failure to gain or loss of a lucrative contract. I work on the west coast of Cumbria in the nuclear supply chain, and people don't want to be bypassed to get the lucrative contract with the nuclear facility up there because they don't know how to create an information security policy. And I just mentioned the heavy fines by acquiring banks. So what help is out there? Security consultants like me, we can come in, we can do a gap analysis, that is to say what best practices and how far away you are from it. There are standards out there, ISO 27001, and if you achieve that standard, that is independently audited, and that can actually tell people that, look, this has been independently audited, it's totally objective, we are operating to this level. Now that can save a lot of questions and a lot of time when bidding for contracts. Instead of getting 30 different questions here and there, do you do that, do you do that, do you do that? If you can present that certificate with the correct scope, then that can save a lot of time. The PCI standard itself is a great standard to follow. It has an intent to it, quite a big document with why you should do all these 12 areas. I find it an interesting read, you may not. And don't forget the information security team of the client. Ask them, if they have an information security department, ask them what you should be complying with. Don't second guess them. They should be telling you. Now, if they're following ISO 27001, they're using a best practice code. Section 6.2.3 says, this is what you should be putting into your contracts, and it outlines it, what you should be doing. And I'll be touching on that in the presentation. And there's government portals out there. Business Link is out there still to look at for how to keep your business secure. And the Information Commissioner's Office website is a useful resource. So what needs to be protected? Any information asset that has value to the company, its customers, its employees, and its partners. That's the premise of my talk today. Security covers three things. The confidentiality, that should only be disclosed to people who are authorised to see it. Integrity should only be changed by those who are authorised to change it. And availability, this is your business continuity things. It should be available whenever you need it. PCI compliance, interestingly, the banks aren't bothered if your systems are off and you've got no availability. They're just concerned that you haven't disclosed anything private. So they actually talk about confidentiality. So the consequences of a breach, if you're contracting to me and I want you to comply, I want you to know that these are the consequences. I could get unwanted media coverage because you've done something stupid with my data. I could lose time and revenue. And I could face substantial penalties because you've obviously not done something right. The Information Commissioner will then ask me, or the acquiring banks will then ask me, did you check this with these people? Did you audit them? Did you ask them? So I could face all these penalties. And then we've got to think about the public. Should it be credit cards or other information? They could be subject to identity theft, financial loss, damage to their credit rating, and then of course we know ultimately all the stress that can cause. So that's why I'd like you to comply with what I'm doing. Now, interestingly, I'm advising companies to be asking smaller companies to be complying with them. So everything I'm saying here is probably going to be asked of you at some point if you're supplying services. Right, know your asset inventory. You can only defend what you know you have. Quite a simple premise. So I think what you should do is create a spreadsheet. It should have several rows, but at least containing the asset type. Is it public? Is it internal only? Is it personal data? Is it sales data? Is it employee data? So it's got a type. Get a vulnerability. So what's the vulnerability? Well, it's stored on a CD near the window that's open. Okay. So what's the threat? Well, the threat is common theft. someone lifting it from the window. The threat could be people just don't know how many copies of that you have, so we don't know if you've lost it. The location, like I said, it's by a window, but it could also be in the cloud, up in the ether. Now, Principle 8 of the Information Commissioner's Office states data should not be transmitted to third-party data should not be transmitted to countries or territories outside of the EU Economic Union. So do we know that our data is actually outside the EU or not? They go further so that they then say, unless they have means of protecting it accordingly. And again, that's quite vague. But you are storing someone's data. You're using something like Dropbox, for example, that was mentioned earlier. You're using Dropbox to get some client information from A to B. Where was that stored in the interim? You need to ask these questions. You need to get assurances from any third party. Where are you storing your data? Risk assess the assets. So I said everything's got confidentiality, rating, integrity, availability. It has an impact to your business, and it also has a likelihood of happening. The CD by the window in a rough area of town, it's quite likely it could get stolen. So you put all this into a formula, and that gives you a risk rating. And that should help you decide which order to fix things, to prioritize. Which is what I've just alluded to there. Then select the appropriate implementation controls. Now, as an auditor, I'd like to see that you've gone through this systematically, not just I read in Wired magazine that this is a great encryption tool. Have you looked at 2 others? Why did you choose that one to this one? What did the other people in your company think about that? Do you have an information security forum where other people can help you choose? And why did you come to that conclusion? I would like to know that. And checking the controls are working to defend the information asset. How do you check it? We've got a virus checker. It's great. It just works every day. Well, how do you know it works every day? We heard a great story at the beginning there of all the tapes that have been used as backups, but they never worked. The logs have never been checked. If you find the data's been stolen from your computer and you put your hand up and say, here, Information Commissioner's Office, we use the whiz-bang antivirus malware checkers, and then he says, okay, can I see the logs? And you say, what logs? Again, you're going to go down their estimations and be investigated further. And then you've got to prove you've acted upon the findings. Now, with ISO 27001, you actually can't get certified until you've proved to the auditor you have improved upon any findings, any initial findings. So what's expected of you? This is cross-referencing ISO 27002. That's the code of best practice. So I'm a large employer, a multinational, and I want you to do services on my behalf. This is what I'd be asking you, because I am ISO 27001 compliant. I'd like to see an information security policy. So if you don't know how to form one of those, there are consultants to help you to form those. And I'd like to know that you've got these controls in place. Procedures to protect your assets. Controls that you've got your antivirus in place and you're checking the logs. An important one is to determine whether a compromise has occurred. In 18 months' time, it's no good telling me that, yeah, 18 months ago we lost some data. And we just found out now. And that's been going on for 18 months. That's got a cumulative cost to it, especially if it's financial data. I'd also want to know that after our contract, that I'm going to get back everything that belongs to me, and you're going to destroy everything that belongs to me. And that dovetails with the Information Commissioner Office, who states the data retention should only be for as long as necessary. I would also like to know that. Restrictions on copying and disclosing information and confidentiality agreements, I'd like to have got those in place if you're sharing my data on as well. Training in methods, procedures, and security. I mentioned earlier, what's the point of having all these procedures in place if no one knows about them? How are you keeping current? Do you follow tweets that I've got the latest threats? Again, I'd like to know this. Do people know their information security responsibilities? When they're handling confidential information, do they know how that should be handled? Have they been trained in that? Was it an induction, for example, when they joined the company? The hardware and software installation and maintenance procedures, that's about availability. If I need a report from you every Friday, I want to know that your systems are going to be up on Thursday when you produce that report for Friday. So I want to know that your hardware is being kept up to date correctly. You're using the industry's, the vendor's best practice guide to keep your servers alive. And a clear and specified process of change management. Anyone that was with RBS or Barclays, or not Barclays, or NatWest, will know that they couldn't get in their bank details, they couldn't get money out. For what? There was a system upgrade. The control hadn't been put in place correctly. And they follow so many standards. They're from Sarbanes-Oxley, ITIL, payment card industry, and they can get it wrong. And I'd like to know that only people that should see my data are the ones that can actually see it. You've got your access controls in place. So the payment card industry standard, which if any of you take payment cards, that's 12 areas. Now what I want to focus on is the last part, the 12, which is to do with your security policies and how you're disseminating your information. And you can see there, the security policy will be published, maintained, disseminated to all relevant personnel. I'd like to know how you check that. Is it on the group intranet? How do they know? I'd also like to know that the incident response system is in place. Again, that's something that ISO asked and also PCI are asking. And also awareness training is in place. Again, something ISO 27001 is asking. So why awareness training? Humans are the weak link in security. That's been discussed earlier today. Employees can actually help identify these areas. It's a little bit like health and safety. If someone saw a cable going across the center of the room, there should be somewhere for them to tell there's a cable over there, someone's going to get hurt. Similarly, if your data is at risk and someone knows about it, there should be a central point for them to call. Otherwise, 10 different people will tell 10 different people, and those people all think that one occurrence has happened. Assess the risk and defend it. Security awareness gets people aware of the data they're holding, their responsibilities, their risk, they can focus on it. Many security threats will be socially engineered. That's the people that send you emails saying, here's the latest update, go to here, and you go there thinking you're going to get the latest update, but no, you're going to a phishing site, they've got your username, password, that sort of thing. There are companies where the staff don't appreciate that. They need to know about it. And also, when the primary technological defense fails, we've got to spot them. It's technology. Technology does fail. If we rely on the technology too much, then we could suffer for it. And for staff to appreciate the consequences. In an awareness training course, I often find when I say to people, and they're wondering, why shouldn't I let the person in from the car park? As soon as I say that, well, you do realize your financial data is on that server down in that room, and it's all your personal data and financial information, then they start to think, oh yeah, it's not just the faceless company I'm defending, it's myself, my data. So for staff to appreciate the consequences is important. So the cost of a data breach, these are just figures. They can be slightly higher, slightly lower. But let's say, for example, with a credit card. The cost of an affected credit card, to investigate that, let's say £100. It's around £100, a little bit less, a little bit more, to investigate. When you're doing X 1,000 transactions per year, that's quite a lot, of £100 now, because each one needs to be investigated that they haven't been done. then it can take 12 to 18 months to actually find there's been a breach. So now it's the thousands times 12 to 18 months. We can see that the figures go up and up and up, and then on top of that you're going to get the costs by the credit card companies because you haven't handled the data correctly. So they're going to fine you on top of that, and then every single card that's to be redone, you'll have the costs passed as well, £20 per card. So it's something that does need to be taken seriously when you think of the long view. So the cost of compliance all depends on the scope. The scope for PCI compliance, if you were to defend the entire company, you'll be spending money on things that don't need defended. It's only for payment cards. Likewise, with other standards, once you've got your asset inventory together, just simply say these are what we need to focus on and defend those accordingly using the risk assessment method. Once if you reduce the scope, you reduce the costs. And be proportionate, do a cost benefit. If a contract's worth £500,000 and it's going to cost £600,000 to defend against the data, it's not worth it. So you need to do the cost benefits. And planning is the key. I always use the old saying of Abraham Lincoln when he said, give me 6 hours to cut down a tree, I'll spend 4 hours sharpening the axe. And that's something that we need to do. It's getting it right in the first instance. Otherwise, we're chasing our tails. We're hitting it with a blunt instrument. Okay, so to finish, compliance matters, and this is why. It demonstrates the company's commitment to protecting confidential details, aids you in the assessment of risks, implementation of controls, helps avoid the heavy fines, tends to get people's ears pricked up. And some key customers may only trade with you if you are working to a particular standard and following their compliance. Okay, well that's my presentation over with. I do have some useful links if you want to jot any of those down. And I also have a printout on my stand outside in the foyer of the presentation if you need to go through that. So thank you very much.